Bobby and I like to make stuff. Today, we're gonna start renovating this kitchen. Welcome to my kitchen. This was my grandparents' kitchen built in 1983. We've been in this house for about 4 years, and so it's finally time for us to completely renovate it. Now, it is a pretty big space already, but we also have a big family. We spend a lot of time in here, and so we want to take it down to bare bones and build it back up so that it works for us. Now, part of this means that we need to change a lot of stuff in here. So in this video, we're actually gonna tear it completely down, and that means moving that wall out, getting rid of all the cabinets and all the old appliances, and then getting new walls built up, new preparations for appliances put in, and new lighting set up. We've got a whole bunch of other stuff coming, but the first thing we need to do is actually take out these old cabinets. Before you start tearing out walls, you need to turn off the circuits for all the circuits that you know are in the area, but even past that, you may have outlets that aren't labeled well on the circuit breaker box. And this little tester is a great way to test whether there's power going to an outlet, but also whether it's wired correctly. So if you're doing electrical work yourself, or if you're gonna be doing demolition, you need to have one of these. They're really inexpensive and totally worth it. We're doing our best not to destroy these cabinets as we take them out. Luckily, these are in pretty good shape, even though they're outdated, so we can donate these. Somebody else can take advantage of them and refinish them or modify them and use them as they need to. And when you usually take out kitchen cabinets, they're screwed into the wall, into studs, and usually a few screws will take them out pretty easily, and you don't really have to smash through them, even though they do that on all the TV shows. We've got all of the uppers taken down. It went really quickly. Now we have to take out the bottom cabinets, but we're actually gonna leave the sink here when we do the full renovation, and the dishwasher is gonna be here. So none of the plumbing is gonna change. So for the time being, we're actually just gonna cut the countertops right next to these and leave these in place as long as we can so that we still have a functioning sink and dishwasher. And eventually we'll have to pull them up because we're gonna need to get new flooring underneath them, but we're gonna put that off as long as we can. If you have any wallpaper to take down in your renovations of any kind, the steamer is the way to do it. I've used chemicals, I've used the little rolly scraper things, and this works way better than all of the rest of it. It just takes a little time. So last night we got a lot of stuff done. We got all the cabinets taken out, and I started working on the floor. Now in this case, there's 2 layers of linoleum with a 1/4-inch sheet of plywood in between them. And so basically we're gonna be taking up the top 2 layers and leaving this first layer of linoleum down, putting hardwood floor on top of that. The problem is that there are tons and tons of staples holding all this stuff down. So we're gonna have to go back and flatten all those. There's too many and they're too long to take out, so we're just gonna nail them in. To take this up, I'm using a big long flat bar, getting underneath it and kind of prying it loose. So I got a lot more of that to do, but let's talk about the wall. I haven't really told you the plan yet for what we're doing here in the kitchen. Basically, we're gonna take this wall, and we're gonna push it all the way back to about right here. And luckily this is not load bearing, so we can easily take it out and then rebuild it. We have a pantry down there on that end that we're gonna be getting rid of because this entire new wall is gonna be covered with cabinets, floor to ceiling, and it's gonna be like a big pantry cabinet. If you're gonna be moving a wall in your house, you have to follow the proper procedures to make sure that what you're planning on doing is safe. In this case, in this part of our house, we have a truss system running across this entire area. And that typically means that you don't have to have any walls in the interior space because none of them are load bearing. In that case, we are absolutely sure that this one is not load bearing. In fact, my next door neighbor is an engineer He's helping me work through it just to make sure. And so this one is going to get pushed back. But I want to point that out, that you have to follow the right procedures. You have to talk to the people that know what they're doing if you want to make a project like this. In fact, we're going to have a gas line run to where the range is going to be. I've got a plumber coming to do that work. That's not something I want to do. I want to make sure it's done correctly. We're going to do some electrical work, but nothing major. If you are doing major electrical work, get an electrician. It's safe, you know it's done correctly, and it can be up to code. All right, that's the disclaimer. Let's get back to tearing out this wall. Whoa!
Oh my gosh.
I'm so strong. Last night we got the plywood and linoleum taken up. We got all those staples pushed down so the floor is good to go. We removed the rest of the wallpaper, took out the corner cabinet, and finished taking out this wall. Now originally the plan was to build a new wall about right here, and then in front of that we were going to build floor-to-ceiling cabinets that went all the way down that had the refrigerator. That was going to be our pantry. But once we got this taken out, it's just too awesome to have the light coming from outside going all the way into the living room, so we're changing the plan. Now, we're going to build some cabinets right here with the countertop. We're going to have a nice big pass-through between these two rooms. It's going to open it up, tons of light, it's going to be great. So here, we're still going to build those cabinets, and they're going to go all the way down. The fridge will be there as well. And today, we have to finish taking out the stuff that we don't need anymore, but we also have to open up this wall. We're going to be opening this doorway and then adding glass on each side of it. So it's going to go from here all the way down to here. So today we've got to finish taking out this wall before we can start building that back. Let's do it. I have no idea why this interior wall is insulated, but it was. One thing to think about when you're redoing your kitchen is that if you're living in the house, everything in the kitchen has to go somewhere else. And if you look at our beautiful dining room, it's covered in just a very small percentage of stuff that was in our kitchen, and the other rooms are completely packed to the gills. I actually wanted to point out why we're going to build this back a little bit. This power line is coming out of the floor, and we need it to be over in this part of the wall, but to actually move that, we have to lengthen this wire, and since we can't do a full new pull of wire, we would have to make a junction box. Now if you do that, if you splice two pieces of Romex together, you have to be able to get to that, which means we would have to expose that box on the wall, things like that. So we're going to leave this exactly where it is, and just put another 2x4 out here, and make that the new opening. Yesterday we got this thing completely opened up, actually a little bit bigger than we needed to. So today we're going to build it back just a little bit and then put in that header across the top. It's not a functional header, it's really just there to take up this space. So once we get that in place, then we can frame in the new doorway, and eventually we're going to build a really cool door. Now that we've got that framing in place, I've got some boxes I need to add so I can move some plugs and some switches into new locations, and then we've got to cover this wall with new drywall. Aww. Now, one of the most annoying and time-consuming things of hanging drywall is actually cutting out when you have a bunch of boxes on a particular wall. I saw a trick on this old house one time using these painted stickers that you would kind of lay on here and then you press the thing up against it. I don't have that, so I'm going to try the same thing with acrylic paint. So the idea is to put some acrylic paint on the surface of these boxes and then take the sheet and lay it against it to transfer this outline on the back of the board, and then we can cut it out. This worked enough. It didn't get the entire box, but as long as we have two corners in a straight line, we can actually measure out from that and figure out the outside shape of the box. And so we can go ahead and mark these and I'll cut them out. Even though it was a little bit messier, that definitely was faster than measuring out these shapes from the outside edges and hoping you get them in the right place. It definitely is a starting point, and then you can trim it to fit. Over the weekend, we finished up all the drywall and finished up all the painting, and to be honest, I'm extremely tired. Today marks 2 weeks of this project, so as you can see, it's taken 2 weeks to get to almost a blank slate to work on top of. I did want to point out a couple of things though. We put new 1/4-inch drywall on the entire ceiling in here, and it was a lot of work, but it looks like a brand new ceiling rather than trying to patch all the old holes. Now, we used people to put that up there. Anthony, Josh, and my wife, Jenny, all helped put that on the ceiling so we could screw it in place. But if you don't have people that can help you with that, you can use a drywall lift. But also the drywall sander that I was using on the walls is a thing that you can rent, just use for the project, and then take it back to the store. There's a bunch of these things that are really helpful, but kind of expensive to own. Another thing that I'm going to be using really soon is a nailer to put down the hardwood flooring. That's one of those things that you may never use again, so just rent it. Find the tools that you need and go pick it up from the store. So now we've got to put on some of the covers on the outlets and move on to the floor. Now we're going to be putting down the same hardwood floor that you've seen me put down in our entire house. We have a video that's just dedicated to that process, so if you want the specifics, go check that one out. We've been doing floor for several days now and it's just about finished. So we're gonna move on and do one final thing in here, and that's to trim it out. We're gonna put up some of the trim that we had to take down, and we're gonna trim out this opening that we've made. For now, we're just gonna be putting in a door jamb and then some casing around the outside. This is really easy to do. Just get some 1x material, put it here on that side and then the top, and then you wrap casing on the outside of it. So let's go cut those pieces down and we'll nail them in. After about 2.5 weeks, I'm very tired, but this is where we're at. We've got basically a blank slate with clean walls, brand new hardwood floors. All the electrical and plumbing is ready to be hooked up to the new stuff that we're gonna put into this space. And so now we're ready to start building everything back up. We're gonna be building a kitchen table, some big doors over there, probably a light fixture, and a whole bunch of kitchen cabinets. So if you got some questions for building kitchen cabinets, things you want us to cover in that upcoming video, be sure to leave those down in the comments below, as well as any other projects in this space that you wanna see. Doing a full kitchen renovation is a lot of work, but it's not impossible. Don't be afraid of it. Be sure to look around your space and figure out ways to make it work for you. This is probably the last room in the house that we have to renovate. So if you're interested in seeing some of the other ones, we've got tons of other videos that you may want to check out. And if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And that will be coming very, very soon. The first thing we need to do here is band practice. Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. don't want to break another crowbar.
Sorry. Better call Dude Perfect.
Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today I want to figure out if it's worth it to make your own kitchen cabinets. Over the past couple weeks, we completely tore out my kitchen and built it back up to a blank slate. Now it's time to work on the cabinets. Now we made a Fusion 360 model of the entire space to try to kind of visualize how it was going to look, where things were going to go, but eventually you have to come into the real world. So I started putting some tape on the walls to figure out where the appliances go, and then we're going to work the cabinets around those kind of fixed points. So we've got some tape on the floor here as well, where I've measured and marked out the actual cabinet sizes that are going to fit in all these spaces. Now I get to make stuff for a living, so I have the opportunity to make these cabinets myself. But in this video, I want to help you figure out whether that's worthwhile or not for you. There are tons of options for this process, but we need to put some ground rules in place so we can figure out whether it's actually worthwhile or not. One is room scale. If you've got a tiny room with 2 cabinets, you're probably better off just buying some because that's going to be faster and easier and they're not that expensive. But if you have a really large kitchen, making them yourself can save you a lot of money, or maybe not. We'll find out. The other thing is the tools that you need to actually make the cabinets. There are tons of different ways to actually construct a cabinet, but you do need a few essential items. You have to be able to cut a straight line, drill a hole, and probably sand a piece of wood. So bare minimum, you got these 3 tools. Now of course the table saw is going to make it a lot faster and easier and more precise, but therein lies the problem. There are multiple ways to do this, and each one of these tools can have a different cost. Plus, hopefully you're using these tools for other projects as well. So we're going to leave the cost of the tools out of this whole equation and let you decide that part for yourself. Of course, there are a million different ways to do this, but we're going to cover 4 different ones to see if the DIY option is worthwhile. The first one is full custom. This is when you hire a kitchen designer, they come to your house, you tell them what you want, and then they figure out the entire thing, go away, get some cabinets made, come back, install them, and the only thing you have to do is hand them a really large check. And I mean really large. It's extremely expensive, but you don't have to do anything. The next option is semi-custom. Semi-custom could mean a lot of different things. Imagine you go to IKEA, you walk around and you look at the different styles you like, you pick out the different pieces you want, and you make a package out of those options. Or you go to a big box store, somebody that works there in the kitchen showroom will help you design the kitchen, usually for free, or you can use their online tools. A lot of the big box stores will have online tools that will let you lay out and pick an entire kitchen without actually 3D modeling. That can be really helpful no matter which one of these options you go with. The quality of cabinet you're going to get out of the semi-custom option is still a pretty big range, but it's probably going to be a lot nicer than right off the shelf. And by off the shelf, I mean literally taking a cabinet in a box off the shelf, bringing it home and putting it in your kitchen. This is a fantastic option, but you don't have as many customization options because these are generally pretty generic. You can usually get them finished or unfinished, but past that, you don't have a lot of control over what they end up looking like. Like I mentioned before, if you've got a small space that you're trying to fill, this might be the option you want to go with, but we're going to go with DIY. Even within that, you have a ton of options. You could build the boxes and buy the doors. You could buy the boxes and build the doors, or any combination. Let's jump in right now and build a really simple cabinet box so you can see how easy it is. When you're custom making your cabinets, you don't have to follow conventions. You can make them as deep or as shallow as you want to, but whatever size you decide on, you want to make sure that they are the same between all of your cabinets so that they line up correctly. To do this, I actually measured out one side panel and then put a piece of tape exactly where I want that line on my table saw to be, so I have a place to always go back to and it will be exact. You don't want any variation between these. To make the carcasses, I'm using maple plywood. It's nice and solid, good looking. And you could use anything here, but this is what I decided to use for mine. So let's cut these down to some side panels. We'll go from there. I cut out these side panels and I have just a little bit left over after cutting 4 of them from a single sheet of plywood. Now, I wanted to point this out. Typically, base cabinets are 24 inches deep. And if you add that up, plus the width of the 3 cuts you have to make on the blade, you shouldn't have any left over. In fact, your pieces should be a little bit short. But I decided to actually make all of these 23 7/8 so that they're a little bit short, And I can add a piece of homemade edge banding on the front face to cover up the plywood and also give a hardwood face to the front of all the cabinets. So I went ahead and ripped these down to 1/8 of an inch strips and then took that 1/8 off the depth of the cabinet. Next up, we're gonna cut some dados in the side panels that we just cut, and that dado is gonna accept the bottom panel. So it's gonna slide into the side panel so it's nice and strong. We'll also glue and screw that together. But we need to cut those dados, and since I'm working with all 3/4 inch material, the dado needs to be 3/4 inch thick, and it needs to be half the thickness of the material deep. So we're gonna take 3/8 of an inch here, that's half of 3/4, and set the depth of the dado blade to meet that. You always want to spin your blade just to make sure that you hit the high point for the teeth. Now that we've got that depth correct, we need to make sure that the distance between that dado and the bottom of the panel is the toe kick. Let's talk about that. So the toe kick on a cabinet is a place for your toe to go at the bottom on the front. And typically that's about 4 inches off the bottom, 3.5 inches in. Those numbers are kind of dependent on what you want to do, but that's what I'm going with for mine. So I want to make sure that the bottom panel is 4 inches from the bottom, and that will also give me the area where the toe kick's going to be. So we're going to measure off the side of the blade 4 inches to make sure that our toe kick area is here. Then we'll have the dado cut past that. If your table saw doesn't take a dado stack, if you're in Europe or something, you would probably want to accomplish the exact same process with a router and a bit. It's going to take a little bit longer. Totally work though. A couple more things here at this stage. If you wanted to add any fixed shelving, you could go ahead and cut some more dados here to put shelves in. We're actually going to be mounting an oven in this, so I need to cut another shelf in 2 of these pieces. And I did want to point out that I picked the prettier side of the 2 sides to actually cut these dados into. That's because I'm going to finish, not paint, the inside of my cabinets. So the inside here is where the shelf is going to be. You're going to see this more, so I want to make sure that I got the pretty side, but the ugly side on the outside. Another option, if you don't want to do this cutout for the toe kick thing, is you could actually make a 2x4 frame on the floor, then make a simple box and set it on top, and then overhang on the front to get that toe kick area. Nailed it. I'm trying to miss the garbage can, in case you're curious. Yes. Cool. I got the sides cut, I got the bottom panel cut, and 3 stringers. I go ahead and do this every time just to make sure that they're all cut at the same time, the same width. And that's because I'm gonna need one on the top, on the back, one on the top on the front, and one lower down. Now I wanted to point out, I have a little method for the measurements here. I've got my main outside measurement, and then I take off 3/8 and 3/8, which is 3/4, and that tells me where the inside piece needs to be. That gives me the measurement for that. Then I take off another 3/8 and another 3/8, and that gives me the width for the stringers. I made a little chart, actually, because then I won't forget what number I'm working on. So I've got my outside dimension, I take off 3/4 of an inch to give me the floor, then I take off another 3/4 of an inch to give me the stringers. Before I start cutting, I write out all these numbers right here based on the outside dimension, and then we can start cutting and not worry about it. When I'm laying these out, because my table is not perfectly smooth, I line up the front faces and drive in one little brad here just to hold it there, and then I'll go back and actually screw it together so it's nice and strong. This is your basic carcass. Now it's just a simple box, but this is the point where you get to decide what you want these cabinets to look like going forward. There's two main types that you'll see, framed and frameless. Now, by framed, I mean building a face frame that goes on front of this that will give it dimension when you look at it from straight on. You can make this out of any material you want, any thickness you want, but that's going to limit the size of the opening that's inside this cabinet. And if you decide that maybe you want to have a drawer up here and doors down here, you want to build the face frame in between those to fill the gap. In the future, if you decide you want to change that orientation, you're going to have to change the frame as well. But we've decided to go frameless, meaning that we're not going to put that face frame on. We're just going to cover up this plywood with the edge banding that I talked about earlier. We'll get that put on, and then when we build the doors and the drawer faces, those are going to go almost all the way over, called a full overlay, to the outside edge, just leaving a tiny gap in between two cabinets. When I nail these on, I actually line them up on the inside with just a slight overhang that you can sand off, and the excess comes on the outside so that you can trim it off more easily. Last thing, if you wanted to add a toe kick down here just for added strength, you could put another stringer across there. We're actually going to hide some storage underneath the cabinets down there, so I'm not going to do that. The last thing on the carcass before it's finished is to fill all these little pinholes with some wood filler. I'm going to end up painting this front face and then clear coating the inside, so it doesn't matter that these are different species of wood to me. But if you're going to be staining or clear coating the entire thing, you may want to try to match up the species here and here just so it all looks the same. I finished up all the carcasses for that wall, for the island. I've still got all of those to do, but it's more of the same. I took everything outside and sprayed the inside of all of them with a polyurethane coat just to protect it. There's actually only 2 of these that are going to have doors. Everything else is going to have drawers, so you won't really interact with the inside much at all. Speaking of the drawers, I've got a whole bunch of these to build, and the way that I went about kind of keeping track of all the measurements is I measured the actual inside of each one of these areas and then came up with a labeling system. I labeled each carcass with a letter number, and then the inside will be 1, 2, 3. So all the parts for this drawer are labeled F1, this one's F2, etc. I've got so many to build that this will help me keep track and separate all the parts. All right, let's head down to the shop, start making some drawers. Before we do that though, let me show you this cabinet. This was made for the sink, and it is a little bit different than everything else. We've got a big farm sink that's going to be pretty heavy, and so we had to kind of support the weight underneath. We've got 2 ledgers running across the sides out of 2x4, and then also pieces that carry that weight directly down to the bottom all the way to the ground. So this one is way more structural than everything else just to account for the weight. It's also got a cutout there in the back so that we could kind of slide it around the plumbing. But just know that there are a few cases where you're going to kind of have to special build a cabinet for a certain situation. There's a few different ways to build drawers. I'm not going to go over it in depth because there's a million videos about it. I'm just going to show you what I did. I'm using 3/4 inch plywood for all the outside walls, and then the bottoms of the drawers are actually different based on what's going to go in the drawer and the overall size of it. Most of them have 1/2 inch plywood bottoms. There are some that have 1/4 inch, and that's usually for the shorter drawers just to save on a little bit of space. I made a dado to match the thickness of the bottom in each one of these pieces, and then I've got some pocket holes on the end, so you just kind of glue and screw this whole thing together. Good to go. I got this one put together, and I've got a couple more to do. Then we're going to spray polyurethane on all of these, the inside and the outside, and then we'll get them mounted on the drawer slides. We're doing full overlay doors and drawer fronts, so I want to make sure that these are mounted before we measure and put those on to make sure that we can get the gaps in between all of them the same. After about 2.5 weeks, this is the last of the lower cabinets we got to put in place, and this is the first of the upper cabinets. This giant thing is going to go on top of this one. They're going to be pushed in place, and then the only carcass that I have left is one to build across, connecting this one to the one on the other side of the fridge. Now, let me tell you, after 2.5 weeks, one of the big things that I've learned about making cabinets is that it is very repetitive and very tiring. So, as you're thinking about whether you want to do this for yourself, you have to take that into account. It's fun at first, and then it gets kind of old. finally got all of the drawers that I have made so far on slides. They're installed. That is a little bit tedious when there's a whole bunch of them to do, but it's not hard. It just takes a little time. I did also add a couple of toe kick drawers. Now these use a special kind of drawer slide that has a little spring in the end of it, so when you push on it, it releases and then pushes the thing out. So with your foot, you can open and close those, and you can use them for small storage, maybe for pans or something like that. We've put 3 of those in the kitchen so far. We're finally ready to start making some drawer fronts and some doors for all the cabinets we've been building, and I'm going to do this in a shaker style, and that means you've got some rails across the top and the sides, and then an inset panel. I'm going to be using maple for the rails because they're going to be taking a beating, and I want the maple to hopefully make them last a little bit longer. The inset panel is going to be 1/4 inch MDF. That's going to paint really well, and it should be fine once all this stuff is painted. You won't be able to notice that they're different materials. So to make these, I got a set of router bits. These are matching bits with 2 different profiles. And so you run all of the pieces to get this particular profile, then you run the ends of 2 of the pieces to add this little tenon so that you can snap all 4 pieces together. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I've already run all of the pieces through to get this profile, and they're using this first bit. Now I'm going to take these pieces and run them through the other bit to add the tenon to the sides, and then we can snap them together. Now I've done several tests on this already, and I've run into several problems, so I've had to redo pieces. When you run these pieces across these really big bits, there's a lot of opportunity for things to splinter, things to blow out. And so I've noticed that you should definitely put a backer piece behind these pieces as you're moving through so the back side of them doesn't get blown out. And then you end up with a cleaner cut. Now there's still a lot of things that can go wrong. Using a bit this big, you have to be really careful and take your time. Here's an example of one of the little things that can cause a problem that you just have to fix later on. When I went into the bit, it kind of scooped down a little bit before it touched the bearing, and so I've got this little notch in this, and that's going to be on the face of the door. I'm going to have to fill it with wood filler. It'll be fine, but it is an extra step that you have to do. You can avoid that just by being really, really careful and taking your time with the router. Now I'm going to try to mount these to these drawers that I made, and I did have to backfill the back of them a little bit with some extra piece of panel because I know that eventually I'm going to put a handle on here. I'm going to need to screw through this, and I want a gap behind it. So that is something I'm going to have to figure out for the rest of these before I move ahead. But to put these on, I'm going to put some double-sided tape onto the drawer, get these mounted correctly on that tape, then push them out and drive in some screws. Okay, so that's the first one, and I'm only putting in 2 screws for now because I'm going to have to take these off and paint them eventually. I'm going to go ahead and add these 2, but I don't think I actually need to finish the rest of these to be able to give you my thoughts on whether this was worth it or not. Obviously, I've got a whole bunch more of these to do, and I've got a bunch of painting and all that stuff, but I do have enough information now to give you my thoughts on whether making your own kitchen cabinets is worthwhile. There's 3 things I want to talk about that I think you're going to have to internalize for yourself because those are going to be different for you than they are for me. Now, like I mentioned before, I get to do this for a living, so I have the opportunity to make these and turn it into a piece of content that's hopefully valuable for you. That works in my favor, and that's not necessarily the case for everybody. All right, now there's one thing I want to point out before we actually get into this. I'm tired. I've been working more than full time on this kitchen for several weeks now. It's a lot of work, and I want to point that out. I don't want to kind of brush that under the rug and let you think that this is just super easy. It's a lot of work. But there's 3 big things that I think are really important. The first one is whether you want to do this or not. There's a lot of people that are just not interested in making their own cabinets, but then there's people like me who just want to do it to have done it. That counts for a lot. Honestly, to me, that's kind of the most important thing. If you can afford to do it, great. If you want to do it, then you should do it. The second thing we need to talk about though is money. And this may be the biggest one to you, but honestly, I don't think it's the biggest factor here. We'll get to that in a minute. Early on in this process, we went to one of the big box stores, took our plan in, and they gave us a quote for doing not exactly this, but essentially the same stuff that I've already built here. That quote was over $14,000. Now, I still have some work to do, I still have some materials to buy, but so far I've spent $4,200 on everything that you see here. So you've got about a $10,000 savings even with the additional stuff that I have to spend. That's a pretty big deal. And if that's your main concern, then you absolutely will save money by building them yourself. But your time is valuable. Now, it doesn't matter what you do for a living, what kind of family situation you're in, your time is one of the most valuable things that you have in this life. It's finite, it's important, and it should be really valuable to you. So you have to choose where to spend that time. And if spending that time building a kitchen is something that you will enjoy, something that you find valuable, then you should definitely do it. But if you're gonna have to kind of force yourself to get through it, to spend all of your extra time making a kitchen just to save a little bit of money, I honestly don't think it's worthwhile. Now, I've enjoyed this process, I've learned a whole lot from it, and I'm, again, in the awesome position to where I can share this with you and kind of turn this into part of my job. But if I had to do this just on nights and weekends or take off time from work to make this kitchen, it absolutely would not be worth the money that I was saving rather than having somebody else do it. So when it comes down to it, this is all about priorities. If your priorities are just saving money, this is probably not the way to do it. It's gonna be a whole lot of work and you're not necessarily gonna enjoy the entire process. If your priority is building something and really getting into it and learning along the way, this is a fantastic project. Your priorities are different than mine and they're different than the other people that are watching this video, so you gotta take all this information and anything else that you can find online, work it together, come up with your own equation, and figure out whether it's worthwhile for you. Now, if you want to see how the rest of these cabinets turn out along with the rest of the kitchen, because we've still got a whole lot of stuff to do, be sure to check out upcoming videos because we've got a whole lot of cool stuff coming. We've also got tons of other types of videos that you may want to check out, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. There's where's everything else that's not really a ready?
I cut together every time you say ready.
Ready? 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 All right, ready? 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 All right, ready?
Yeah.
Howdy ho, neighbor. Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna see if we can finish this kitchen. When you're watching TV and you see people renovate their kitchen, they have to skip over a whole bunch of stuff to fit it into the time allowed for TV. On YouTube, we can do whatever we want to. So, in this video, we're gonna spend some time going through the rest of the kitchen and talk about a lot of the little details, the decisions that you have to make in the process that often get skipped over. You see the big parts like demolition, you see some of the cabinet building, which we still have a lot to do. But there is a whole lot more to it. So let's jump into some of the little details that we still have to do to finish this room up. One of the things that gets completely glossed over on a TV show is how to deal with the timelines of renovating a kitchen. There's a huge number of decisions to make, and those take time. And then once you make those decisions, you have to order stuff, and that takes time. And there's all sorts of delays that can be built into that. For example, it took us forever to decide on the appliances that we wanted. They just showed up. But after we ordered them, the oven that we chose got discontinued and they canceled the order. So we had to go back and choose all new stuff that matched and worked together and then reorder them, and then there was a delay in shipping. It took a long time for them to get here. And unfortunately, most of your cabinetry is built around your appliances. In this case though, we were lucky because these manufacturers actually had CAD models of all of their products on the website, so we could import those into Fusion and then build the cabinets around them. So the appliances that we got are this brand new range, which I'm really excited about. We also got a new dishwasher down here and a new wall oven to go over here. Now, most of these things can be put in place, but the wall oven actually needs to be screwed into the cabinetry. And so I can't actually put this in place yet completely because we also haven't chosen a paint color. We have to paint these cabinets and this trim behind it before we can screw this in. So there's a little bit of delay on getting some pieces installed, whereas the freestanding ones are good to go. Another one of the big timelines that you have to think about are cabinetry and countertops. You have to have all the carcasses in place and locked to the walls or to the floor before you can measure for countertops. And then it takes a couple of weeks to get somebody out to measure and then several weeks for them to manufacture. So I had to get all these carcasses in place. You saw that in a previous video. And I didn't get all of the doors on because the priority was getting the carcasses locked down so we could measure. So now that that's in progress, I'm going back and putting on all these doors, and I've got some basic doors on the front of the cabinets that are open under the sink and all that. But I wanted to show you this. This is a dishwasher that's called a panel-ready dishwasher. which means it has a super ugly front because they're expecting you to build a panel to match your cabinetry to stick on here. So this thing is actually not set in place yet because I want to make this panel. It's going to look just like these other doors. I'm going to get this mounted and then get it all leveled and all that stuff before we actually screw it into the cabinetry around. Again, we had the space perfectly fit for this because we had a CAD model from the manufacturer. When you're making cabinets, you can get into kind of a motion where you just like get all the measurements and you start cutting pieces and you move along, but occasionally you'll have a custom piece. Like I was showing you for the dishwasher earlier, I've got a single panel here that I had to make up that mimics two separate pieces, a drawer front and a door. Now there needs to be a gap right here, so I'm gonna go ahead and glue this up and get it clamped into a single piece. Then I'll go back and take it through the table saw and add a little kind of gap here so it looks like that these are two separate pieces, but it really just be from a distance you'll see a continuing line along here onto the rest of the cabinets. This is just one of those custom things that you kind of have to account for. It takes a little extra time, but it's totally worth it. The other day we had the person come to measure for our countertops, and that was a really cool process to watch. He had a really interesting little device to use for that, but while he was doing that, I was asking him about the overhang. On our island, we're gonna have the countertop overhang the back side of it about 16 inches so that you can sit here on a stool. Well, that overhang is actually a way longer unsupported span than they recommend. So they told me that I needed to get some sort of a bracket. I ordered these brackets made just for this specific situation, and they need to go right here, be flush with the top of the countertops, and they need to be in something thicker than 3/4 material. So, got some 2x6s here. We're gonna screw these to the back side of that and then replace these 3/4 stringers with the big 2x6s. As you can see, we got our new vent hood installed. It took 3 of us to actually get it held in place and get all the screws put in and all that stuff. But that was actually the easy part. You have to connect this to some way to actually push all of that air out, either through a soffit or a vent or something. So we're gonna go up and do that. You also have to put power to this. I've got a wire run in the attic. I just need to create a receptacle so we can plug it in. But I wanted to show you this. When you put this thing in place and you have to slide it around against the wall and hold it, it kind of messes up the paint a little bit. So not only do we have to install this, but we have to go back and clean up around where it was put. All right, so I'm gonna do that work. Let's head up to the attic. So one of the things that's a big hassle is being up in the attic and having to work around the existing structure and all that. Our vent line is coming up from right over here, and we need to extend that pipe that we put in up so that it goes out this gable vent up here. Now you could send that out a soffit, you could put a flappy vent in the wall and have it go out that, whatever works for you, but either way you're gonna have to route it to the correct place, and that's always kind of a hassle in an attic. Since the last little clip that we shot here, a lot of time has passed. Earlier on in the video, I talked about how there were delays that you can't control and how we were still waiting on countertops. Well, that scene that we shot has been over a month ago. We're still waiting on countertops to show up. They're still not here yet, hopefully next week. But in the meantime, we're trying to finish up all the painting. So we've got a whole bunch of the painting done on the cabinets and a lot of the pieces installed. We've got several doors that are ready to go on and kick plates. So let's get to that. We're finally coming into the home stretch on the kitchen. The counters are going to be delivered and installed next week. So before that, I want to get the cabinets completely finished. I've got the doors hung, I've got all the drawer faces mounted. So now we just need to put on the handles and we can start using them. Some of the handles that we got, we could find locally, but we wanted some bigger ones. And so we had to special order these. Unfortunately, we had to wait about a week for these to show up. Another one of the delays that you run into. But now that these have all shown up, we need to figure out a way to install them all, and there's a whole bunch of them. This is a jig for mounting hardware, and this was sent to us by a company called True Position. It's not sponsored, it just showed up one day, but it's actually really cool. You can adjust the holes to match the hardware that you're using, and then you can use this sliding stop so that you can get it in the same position, and it's reversible. So you can work on it this way, drill some holes, flip it around on the opposite door. So let me show you how this works on one of the doors. I didn't drill any of these holes all the way through, and that's because I don't want them to blow out on the back side. So I've got another piece of wood and I'm just gonna hold it up against it really tight, maybe even clamp it on, and then drill that hole all the way through this piece. Now that I have these on, I'm gonna keep the jig set up like this so that I can finish all of the doors. That should go really quickly. Then I can adjust it for the drawer faces. Now, we've been working on the kitchen for 5 months. And even since we've had the cabinets in place, we've not been using them because I knew that we were gonna have to put the pulls on them eventually. Now I'm finally at a point where I can do that. We can start using the kitchen, whether we have countertops yet or not. We started filming this video about 2 months ago. One of the first things I said in that video is that timelines become an issue. Well, it's still true because we're supposed to have countertops. They were supposed to be installed today, and as you can see, there are no countertops. They got delayed again, and they are delayed indefinitely. So rather than drag this video out anymore, let me show you where we're at in the kitchen. Who knows when we're gonna get countertops, but in the meantime, we still have a lot of projects to do. We need to put some lighting over our island. We need to add a tile backsplash, build some shelves. We still have a little bit of patching, lots of painting to do, and a bunch of custom inserts to go inside these cabinets. So my question to you is, how do you want to see that? Do you want individual project videos? Do you want big wrap-up videos? Let us know down in the comments. We've got tons of other types of projects that you may want to check out, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And a TV show is our new stuff after picking. Had to pick. Okay. All right. Here. Some stools underneath it. You can sit up under it. And we can do that either. I forgot what I was gonna say. Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna make a custom pendant light. If you've been watching for a while, we've been renovating this kitchen, and unfortunately we're still not finished because we're waiting on countertops to show up. So while we're waiting on those, we're gonna go ahead and do some of the other projects. One of the big ones in here is lighting. We've got some recessed lighting around the outside, but we need some pendants over this big island that we've made. So we've looked around, we found several different pendants that are pretty cool. We like them, but they're kind of expensive. So rather than just buying those and putting them in, we're first gonna see if we can make our own. And then if they don't turn out, we can always fall back to buying some. Now, making your own pendants is really easy, and you've probably seen this a lot of different ways. You can buy really simple kits that are just a fixture with a plug. Sometimes they have a switch, sometimes they don't. But once you get one of these, you can actually mount it to the ceiling with this simple cover. Now, these two things together on Amazon, maybe $20. So from here, you can use this as a base to build a specific pendant just like you like. So this cover comes with all the hardware that you need to mount it to a box in the ceiling. It's even got a pass-through that's white for the wire, so you can hardwire the light. Then you get one of these kits, and you gotta make sure that when you're buying these, you look at the measurement in between the three objects. So in my case, I don't really need the switch, and I don't need the plug, so I made sure that the distance between these two is about a foot, enough that I can cut off, because what I really want is a lot of wire with the fixture at the end. That way I can hang this from the ceiling, take it up through this cover, and hardwire it into the box. So just make sure that you look at that when you're buying these, or if you can find one without the switch and without the plug, even better. So the ones we found online that we kind of liked are kind of a bow tie shape. They're like this, and then the top section is a little bit smaller. Then there's some sort of a little nub that comes out, and this was painted white, and that was wood. So I started thinking about how to do this on my own, and originally I was going to turn it on the lathe, either making these three pieces separately or try to make it all as one, but then painting this outside. The more I thought about that, the more of a waste of material and time it seemed like to turn a big segmented thing and then paint it. So we're gonna try a really simple approach with veneer for these shapes, but then put a 3D printed piece right here in the middle so that they have something to attach to. So the first step is to figure out how to make this shape in 3 dimensions out of veneer. I went online and started looking for how to make a template for a cone so that we could make those two shapes that I was showing you before. And I ran across this website. I'm not affiliated in any way, but I just found it, and it's pretty amazing. It's called blocklayer.com. It has a simple way to make templates for this shape, but then when I started looking around, there's all sorts of different shapes that you can make. You can make clock faces, and then if you go to the home directory, you can actually find ways to make stair tread templates and decks and all sorts of stuff. The thing I care about right now is actually making a cone. And the cool thing about this UI here is that you can actually change all of the dimensions, the top, the bottom of the cone, and it updates in real time. And then as you make changes, it updates the template. You can save this template out as a PDF, so you can print it out on paper, you can cut it out on a laser, whatever. But this is a really cool tool to be able to get different templates for different types of shapes. So I've made the 2 templates that I need for these 2 different cones, and I'm gonna use the laser to cut them out just so that they're really precise. But you absolutely do not have to have a laser for this. You could print them out full size on pieces of paper and then use that as a template to put on your material, cut it out with a bandsaw or a jigsaw or a knife, whatever you have. I'm gonna use the laser just because it's here and it's fast. As you can see, this veneer has a lot of curve to it, so use some magnets to hold it down. The first test I did, actually I was worried that this piece would come loose as it got cut, and it did. So this time, I actually just scored them on the top. So it's not cut all the way through, but it's about half the thickness of this veneer, and that works out really well because now you can kind of just break these away. Let me show you. So you can kind of tear that out with a little help from the knife, and you've got a little bit of stuff left over, but that goes away really easily with some sandpaper. And the sandpaper also helps get rid of the burn mark around the outside edge. Now I've got 6 pieces of each one of these sizes cut, and I've kind of just gently sanded off the outside. Eventually they'll need some more sanding once I get all the pieces together. But the next step is to try to get these wet enough to hold them into their shape while I glue them up. So the first thing I'm gonna do is to take 2 of these, soak them in water, and get them pliable. Then I'm gonna get them into the shape that they need to be. I'm gonna clamp them like that, let them dry, then take them apart and wet them a little bit again and put on the glue. So the first thing is to wet these, and to do that, I took the top of this container because I needed something really shallow but big. And so I'm just gonna stack these in here and put some weight on them to hold them down, fill this thing up with water, let them soak for a couple hours. So one of the problems I see with trying to turn this into a cone is the wood grain. The grain direction is running like this. It's going to be different on every one of these, but because that grain is running this way differently than it is over here, they don't uniformly fold into the cone. So I think we're going to have to end up making a 3D printed ring that goes around the outside that forces it into its final shape. It's the next day, and I've got one of these cones that has dried out completely in this shape with the prettier wood grain on the inside, because I think we're going to paint the outside. So this part I think is ready to go. We've also done some 3D printing. We've got these inside pieces like I talked about before, but we've also got this ring. Now this ring is made out of 4 pieces. They fit together, and then we'll theoretically go around the bottom of that to hold it into the correct shape. But these 4 pieces have to be glued together. And to put them together, I'm going to use this gloop. It's a specialized glue for PETG. And so we're going to glue these pieces together into a ring, let that set up, and then we'll try it out. Okay, so this piece has been in here for quite a while. It's going to pop back a little bit. Oh, actually worked pretty well. So this will eventually get some glue, but I want to make sure that this will be able to slide into this slot and see if it will actually take the shape. I think it will. It's just going to take a little bit of finagling. Like I mentioned before, this thing is in prototype territory, and the further along I get on it, the more I realize I just really don't think it's going to be the final option. It's not going to be the thing that we want to put in the kitchen. It's a cool experiment, and I probably am still going to see this through all the way to the end. But while the glue is drying on that, I think we're actually going to switch gears. I really like this. I like how this part turned out. I think this would look really cool as the top of the light still, but we need to work on the cone. So rather than go the veneer route, I think we're actually going to stack up some plywood, put that on the lathe, and try to get to basically the same point. So let's do that real quick and just switch gears. Holy. I think you can see what I'm going for here. Now that these are glued up, once it's dry, we'll get it on the lathe, flatten out the outside and then the inside. But I'm curious from you, at this point in the video, do you think the first one is the way to go, or do you think this is going to be the better option when it's all said and done? So hit pause, go down and let me know which one you think is going to turn out, or maybe which one you're going to like better, and then we'll find out at the end. Now we're ready to try this, and I want to just put a disclaimer here and say that this may be a very bad idea, so I am not recommending that you try this. But what I want to try to get the outside of this kind of smooth is to use this tool. This is an Arbortech tool called a turbo plane. And so I'm going to turn this in reverse and then just kind of scoop off this top sharp edge on each of these just to try to flatten it out a little bit before we start working with the lathe tools. This should go a lot faster, but it does have potential to be a little dangerous. Don't try this at home. I'm definitely liking where this is going. I think it's got potential to be pretty cool. And I want to use this piece from the first iteration of this lamp, but it was a little bit too tall, so I cut off the ring, but that also cut off the taper that was on the inside that let this set down without that little gap. So now, I'm kind of having to work around that. I'm going to take the Dremel and scoop out the inside of this and kind of taper on the inside so that it will sit down and hopefully be kind of flush. So I think these are the pieces, and it should be good to go. We just have to put some oil on this, some sort of clear coat or oil on the inside of this, and then pick a paint color to go out here. I'll probably do white, but we'll see. Then we just got to put it all together, string in the light, and hang it up. So here's the final pendant, and I'm extremely happy with how this one turned out. I'm really glad that we didn't just keep going on one thing, but instead shifted gears and came up with a different idea. I love the combination of the plywood and the white and the cherry, and I think we can use that same thing for the other two pendants. So I have a question for you. Should I try to replicate this 2 more times, or should I use those elements and make different shapes for the other two pendants to make 3 different things that all work together? But I have another question as well. The veneer version of this light just didn't work for me, but I'm curious, from people that have worked with veneer more, do you know a way that we could have made that work? If so, let me know down in the comments. Give me your ideas about the other pendants down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. We've got tons of other types of projects that you may want to check out, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And then to hold it together, we're actually going to put... After we had those sitting in the water for the okay. That's not right. But now that I've got this paste, let me know down in the comments, because I would love some feedback, so that I could cover the plywood edge band. Not supposed to film that. Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna turn a big awkward cabinet into a roll-out pantry. We're back here in the kitchen. We've got a whole bunch of projects left to do here, and one of those is building custom inserts for a lot of these different cabinets. The one we're gonna do today is actually a really big utility piece. Currently, this is a door that just hinges out, but we're gonna change that because we've actually changed our mind about what's gonna go here. Instead, this door is gonna be on the front of almost another cabinet that's gonna come out. A really big thing that can hold a bunch of food and trash bags and stuff like that, but also brooms and vacuum cleaners. Overall, it's going to be a pretty straightforward cabinet build, but we have to make sure that it's strong enough to carry the weight of the cabinet itself on slides and also all the things in it. Let's head down to the shop. So this is going to be really basic. It's going to be a box split into 2, and then this section will have adjustable shelves in it that we can change up and down depending on what we need to put in there. This side is going to be mostly open, with a place to hang our vacuum cleaner and some brooms and stuff like that. And we're also gonna have to have some power in here so that that vacuum cleaner can charge. So I'm gonna start by making the box, then we'll deal with all the inside stuff later on. So far we've just put the outer box here together with some butt joints with glue and screws. Now that's not going to be terribly strong because this thing is going to be coming out of the cabinet this way, and it could flex, it could turn a lot like this, and you don't want that, so we're going to need to reinforce it on the inside. Since it's a basic box, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how we're going to put it together so that we can add some structure on the inside of it to keep it held up. Now the biggest thing by far is going to be the back panel. That's going to be cut to these inside dimensions out of 1/2-inch plywood and dropped all the way in, and it's going to touch all 4 sides. That's going to stop the entire thing from being able to rack quite as much as it could before. But also, we're going to add a centerpiece down here through the middle that'll get tied to the back panel and to the top and the bottom. And we're also going to add some fixed shelves in here that will lock that centerpiece to the outside. Also, on the very bottom edge, we're going to add a piece that spans all the way across, and that'll act as a way to stop stuff from falling out, but also to give it a piece of kind of structure across the bottom that will stop it from being able to rack. So all those things together should be able to keep it in the correct shape. I realized that cutting down that back panel and inserting it is going to make the interior structure a 1/2 inch up. So this center divider, even though I cut it like the 2 sides, I need to make it a little bit less deep to account for that back panel. You may have seen that I had the blade raised really high on the table saw, higher than you normally should, but that's because this piece has a crazy curve in it. This is the only piece of plywood I could get the day I went to buy it, so unfortunately this is what I have to deal with. When I put it into the box, I'm just going to have to make sure that I can get it as flat as possible on the outsides, screw that in, glue that in, let it dry, and then work on the center to try to get this entire thing as flat as I can make it. Now, one of the things about this is that I wanted to drop this piece in, but not smear glue all over the inside. So I'm actually going to lay the bottom piece underneath the cabinet, put glue around the outside edge, and then try to wiggle this down over top of it. It's not going to be super graceful, but it will stop glue from being smeared on this surface because I want to keep this bare wood if I can and not paint this part. I went ahead and got some edge banding on the outside of this plywood, and we've got a whole bits video about edge banding. You've probably seen me do it a billion times, but if you need any tips or pointers about that, go check out that bits video. I've got that on and sanded down smooth, and so now I'm going to start working on the shelves. And originally I was planning on those shelves being adjustable. We were going to make some holes in the side and be able to move them up and down, but the more I thought about it, I really don't think there's a need to. This particular height is going to hold tall things like bags of chips and cereal boxes, and if you lay those in here, you only get about 4 shelves. So I think instead of making it adjustable that we probably won't take advantage of, we're just going to have 3 fixed shelves, 4 spaces, and we're going to add the piece along the bottom. I've already got this area marked out right here for this piece of cherry. And so I'm going to cut that out and then put this in as an extra stringer across the bottom. Then we're going to use the same cherry to put the face on each of these shelves. All right, I've got these pieces cut down, and basically we're just going to put this on the front of the plywood to act as a stringer, but also as a little ledge. So I want to make sure that it is uniformly lifted up over the top. And to do that, I've just got a piece of scrap material. I'm going to lay this down on the table and then put the shelf on it upside down so that when this piece sits down, it will overhang the thickness of my little scrap. I cut it too deep. I just need to trim off the back of it, but that's really weird. I bet it's exactly an inch over. Yep, I pulled a bob. Totally bobbed it up. I've got one more of these to put in, and then I'm going to do a little bit of sanding on the whole thing and add some clear coat, and that's really going to make the cherry pop out. I think that'll really stand out and look nice against all of this other edge banding. Then, once it's dry, we're going to take it up and try to figure out how to make it actually slide in and out of that cabinet. I carried this thing upstairs into the kitchen, and it's pretty heavy, so we're going to make a little bit of an adjustment. I've got these non-marking casters. These can hold several hundred pounds apiece, and we've got 2 of them. And these are 5 inches, kind of top to bottom. So that fits perfectly on the bottom of this, in between this surface and the floor. So we're gonna be adding some of these to that. We're gonna have to make some adjustments over here to account for it. We're gonna have to cut a slot down there in the bottom, but the bigger concern right now is the fact that these drawer slides that I put in, that will go on the back of that whole assembly that we've built, are actually kind of inaccessible. There's a little lever right here that separates the 2 parts of the slide. And so if you ever want to take it out of here completely, you have to be able to hit this lever right here in the middle. And unfortunately, with the whole cabinet right here, it's going to be really hard for me to get my hand back there. But there is a tiny little lever right here that doesn't take much pressure to push. And so my hope is that sticking a stick back there and flicking that little lever on all 3 of these will release the whole thing. But I also have to cut out the bottom of this cabinet. Like I mentioned before, we weren't planning originally on having this thing come in and out of here. So I went ahead and built it as a cabinet with a door, but now we need to cut a slot right here down through the middle so that 2 of these casters can roll in and out. And that's also going to change the kick plate, which is down here. It's just a piece that's put on to this cabinet. So we're going to take that off and actually attach it in front of one of the wheels. So as you pull this thing out, the kick plate will come with it. All right, we've got the thing pretty much ready to go in, I think, but before we test it, I want to go ahead and get the power that's back there routed into the cabinet that comes out. So I've got this little unit. It's basically just a power strip with a long flexible cord. So we're going to plug this in back there and then mount this on the inside of that cabinet facing in. That way we can plug in the vacuum cleaner and anything else we need to charge. So I'm taking bets, if you want to leave bets down in the comments, as to whether this thing's actually going to go in first try or if I'm going to have to adjust where things are. But I have to make sure that I go ahead and plug this in before we try to actually slide it in, just in case we can't get it back out. So I had to put a spacer underneath the wheels, and I think I didn't account for that spacer when I put the slides in. So they're all 1/8 of an inch too high on this part, which is easy enough to fix. I had to switch gears a little bit, and I found that having the drawer slides on the back of it allowed it to move this way and this way. And it was really hard to get all that stuff lined up and in there. So instead, I put the slides on the top, and there's actually 2 of them you can see up here, and that guides it forward and backward and tries not to let it turn as much. Now the wheels in the bottom are parallel as best as I could get them, so they stay pretty well in line. and it does open and close. Now it doesn't run super smoothly, not as smoothly as if it were a drawer, but that's because the weight of this entire thing is actually sitting down on the wheels. So you do have to push it a little bit, but it does close and it does open easily. So now we just gotta put the door face on this, add a handle, and this thing's done. I think the last thing to add here is to take the toe kick that was originally on the cabinet and put it on this entire mechanism so it covers up the wheel, and I want it to move with it. That means it needs to be moved up so it doesn't drag on the floor a little bit, but also because it's going on this surface, we got a little bit of a difference to make up. So have a little block, and we're gonna screw those together and then screw this to the bottom of the cabinet. There'll be a little tiny gap here at the bottom, and this should be able to move freely. Got the toe kick put on there, and it looks a little funny from this view, but it still needs some white paint. Hopefully that'll hide it a little bit. That's just kind of the way it's gonna be. There is another thing that I realized though at this point. So I put the vacuum cleaner in here and hung it where I thought it needed to be. Unfortunately, because of the lengths of the slides, this whole thing didn't come out quite as far as I was hoping it would. So it's back a little bit more. This can come out. It's just not as convenient as I was hoping. The big thing is here that we can store it in here, and we can store stuff here, and this thing is done. I had to shift gears quite a few times on this to get this thing to work, but I am really happy with how it turned out because it took what would otherwise be a big, awkward space and made it pretty well organized and pretty useful. This thing is especially deep. It's next to a wall, it's next to a fridge. It's kind of weird, but now we can take advantage of it and use it for quite a bit of stuff. I will recommend, if you ever make something like this, a big rolling pull out, make sure to go ahead and just plan on there being wheels underneath it. It steadies it, it straightens it, and it helps carry the weight, and it is absolutely the way to go. But if you have some other ideas for how to do the inside of something like this, I would love to hear about it because I have a lot more to do. We've also got tons of other projects that you may want to check out, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Action!
For real? But we're gonna add it to this entire unit so that the toku. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff, and today we finally have countertops. We've been working on this kitchen for about 6 months, and it was going along just fine until we ran into a snag. We ordered countertops, and they have taken months to be delivered. And unfortunately, there's several projects that are waiting on the countertops to be in place first, but I found out some good news. In 2 days, the countertops will show up, and then we can keep moving ahead. And in the meantime, we've got a couple of things we want to finish up before they get installed. And one of the big things is finishing up the island. There's a bunch of different ways you can make a kitchen island, but in this case, I just made individual cabinet boxes, screwed them all together, and then screwed them down to the floor. So they're just cabinets. We've got the front of this all finished up. In fact, we're actually using a lot of these already. We've got the appliances installed, but the back side of this thing is pretty ugly. When building these cabinets, I could have just covered the back with plywood and that would have probably looked good enough. But I wanted to make sure that we had enough access to get all of the appliances installed, get the electrical work done, all that type of stuff. So at this point, we need to cover it up and make it look good. We're gonna make a slatted wall that covers it up, something that we can put on and take off if we need to. And it doesn't really need to be super detailed. It's gonna be covered up with the shadow and with some stools that are gonna sit here. So we're gonna make something textural, something that looks nice and is really simple. Obviously, you could do this with any wood that you want to, and I've gone through some of the different options that we have available to us to try to figure out which one is going to be not terribly expensive, which one's going to be not a huge amount of work to actually mill up and get it to the right sizes, and just what we can get enough of. So we've got a bunch of cherry. Unfortunately, it's all rough sawn, so it would be a huge amount of work to get it down to pieces like this. You can buy poplar or maple, and it's already milled down to the right sizes, but these are gonna be pretty expensive. And so what I think I'm actually gonna do is get some cedar decking boards, and then we're gonna strip them down into individual strips, and I think that's gonna be a relatively cost-effective way to get a bunch of variation out of big single boards that you can get at a home center. So I got some cedar boards, and I got 1x10s because we're gonna use 1.5 inch strips. And so I did a little bit of basic math and figured out that we can get the most bang for our buck out of this width board. And I wanna cut these down into those strips, but I have to try to avoid some of the big cracks. The stuff we had to choose from has a lot of knots, which that's how cedar is. There are also a lot of cracks and a lot of chunks on the edges that are kind of missing. So I'm gonna try to work around those to make these as efficient as possible. First step is to cut them all in half and then go back and cut each one of those into all the strips. Got all the strips cut down. There's a whole bunch of them, and I think I've got them laid out how I like. We're gonna have a 1/4 inch spacer that we're gonna use, so the gaps are 1/4 inches, and we're just gonna lay it on the top of a piece of maple plywood, and I think that bright color will fade away. Before we put these things down, though, I wanna do something to them so they don't look like they just came off the shelf. So we're gonna actually use a router table and run each one of these pieces over the bit on both sides to add a little round over. I did a little test piece just to make sure that I like the look, and I think it's gonna look really good. So we're gonna set it up on the router table, put on some headphones, and run a round over on each side of every one of these pieces. So we've got to make this pattern and put these little strips on this board, and I want to screw them in from the back to make sure that they're nice and strong over time. In the meantime, we need to get them spaced out evenly, and then I can flip the whole thing over. So we're going to use some hot glue, put a couple of dabs on each one of these pieces, stick it down, then use this 1/4 inch spacer before putting on the next one, and we'll work a few at least, flip it over and make sure that they stay in place, add some screws, flip it back over, and repeat. So one of the things that's difficult here is I need to put screws in line all the way down, at least 2 per piece, and it's gonna be kind of hard to figure out exactly where those are in line. So I got a laser level here, and I'm going to kind of center it with the end of one piece, go on the other end and make sure that that line is at least within the piece that I'm trying to screw into. Then along this line, I can just pre-drill and drive in 2 screws, and then I move it down to the next one. So once I get both of these panels done, I'm gonna have to go back and run a sander over them. They're not in too bad shape, but there definitely are some areas that are still rough from the store. So I'm gonna sand them down a good bit, and then we're gonna put some sort of a clear coat on this to try to bring as much contrast to the wood as possible. I'm not sure what that is yet. Probably something with an oil in it that seems to make cedar pop a little bit more. So an oil and polyurethane mixture of some sort, but I still have the whole other panel to do first. I'm gonna use teak oil finish for this, and this is specifically made for dense woods, but I used cedar, which is not a dense wood at all. The thing about this is that it has a lot of oil in it that will penetrate the wood, and then there's a polyurethane in it that hardens, and so that will harden the surface of the wood a little bit, which is great for things that are already hard like teak. I'm gonna use it on this cedar just because I have it around, I like the look of it. So even if it's not the perfect finish for this, it will work. You may be wondering to yourself, why did you pick cedar for an area that's gonna get kicked with shoes? It's gonna take damage, the stuff is pretty soft. We know that it's gonna take damage. We know that it's gonna wear a little bit and age, and so we kinda actually want this section to become rustic over time. Now, if there's damage to any of these, we can easily take the panel off, unscrew one piece, and replace it. So we're not really that worried about it, but we do want it to end up looking like it's been there for quite a while. I'm extremely excited to finally announce that we have countertops. After many, many months of waiting, they got installed today and they look fantastic. We're really, really happy with them, but now I have zero excuses not to finish up the backside of this island and call it done. So to finish it up, we have one more thing to do before we can install those panels, and that's to add a plug. To add power here, I'm not gonna run a whole other box. I'm gonna do something that's kind of temporary, and it's actually gonna be attached to the panel that's gonna come in and out. This is essentially just a power strip, but it's shaped in a way that you can install it into something, drive in some screws, and it makes it a little bit more permanent. The other end of this is gonna get plugged into a receptacle that I've already put inside this island, so if I ever need to take it out, I can just unplug it and move on. And in case you're wondering, this is the exact same one that we used in the pull-out pantry that we created earlier, right over there, and if you want to check out that video, we'll have it linked. Making a kitchen island is an awesome way to upgrade your space, whether you're doing a full renovation or just a little upgrade. You can make the cabinets just like I've shown you before, and then you can cover it with whatever material fits your design or fits your budget. This part of the kitchen is completely finished, but we still have a lot to do in here. This whole wall needs a backsplash, and we need some shelves. There's a lot to do over here, even though finally we now have a place to put some food. Thank you so much for checking out this video. We've got tons of other ones that you may be interested in, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Perfect.
Making a kitchen island is an awesome way to up your game of what am I trying to say?
Upgrade your kitchen.
Upgrade your kitchen. Upgrade your space, whether you're doing a full renovation or just a little upgrade. Did I say upgrade?
Upgrade twice.
Dang it. Specifically to what you need in the floor print. Floor print? Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna make custom trays that can fit any cabinet. We're back here in the kitchen today, and we're gonna do a little project that I think a lot of people could use, whether you're renovating a kitchen or just have a big cabinet that you wanna make a better use of. So, you saw me before make these cabinets, and I made these drawers out of really simple construction, and the front of them has a drawer face on them, so it covers up the pocket holes on this. Well, today, we're gonna do something different. We've got these really large cabinets, and they're almost unusable, they're so big, and so we wanna take advantage of the space and organize it better by making some trays that can come in and out. Now, these are not gonna have a drawer face on them, so they need to look a little bit better. They need to be a little bit nicer, so we're gonna make them with something I've never done before, dovetails. And we have to figure out how to make those fit behind this opening and on the outside of this hinge. So let's head down to the shop and we'll figure out how we're gonna do it. We're going to be starting this project with a rough piece of cherry. I'm going to mill this down into 1/2-inch pieces. Obviously, you could just go buy some 1/2-inch material if you want to. And we've covered the milling process pretty extensively in one of the bits videos and in a bunch of other videos. So, milling montage.
Great montage.
I wanted to say something about the riving knife on my saw. People often ask why I take it in and out sometimes. And oddly, on this saw, the top of this riving knife, where it should be a little bit below or right at the edge of the blade, is actually higher. So if I'm cutting a slot through something, not cutting all the way through, the riving knife will actually get caught inside the piece. And so sometimes I'll have to take it out if I'm working the blade up through a piece of material. That's something I'm going to have to figure out, either to adjust the saw or just grind down this top edge to make it. But I'm just letting you know that this needs to be there for safety, and I only take it out when I absolutely have to. I finally got these pieces milled down to 1/2 inch. Now, I'm using solid wood here. You could make drawers out of plywood if you want, but the next step of this would actually not turn out so great if you used plywood, and that's because we're gonna add dovetails to the ends of these. Now, this is something I've never done before other than just some test pieces here in the last couple days. For this, we're gonna be using a jig. If you wanna cut all your dovetails by hand, be my guest, but that's not my thing. Instead, we're gonna use this jig from Rockler, and it's gonna make it a lot easier. Now, when you look at this jig, it's gonna look pretty complicated, but it's actually not. In fact, on the back of the instructions, these are all the steps that you have to take to actually make a dovetail with this jig, depending on whether you're doing half or full. That means whether you see them on both sides of the joint or just on one side. I spent about 30 minutes trying to figure this thing out and get it set up. It's totally easy, and now that it's set up, I can just cut all of the dovetails on all of the pieces for all of my drawers and be done with it. Now, the cool thing about this is it comes with dust collection, but basically the important part is that it has these different pieces you can put in, whether you're doing half or full dovetails, and then all of the settings are just based on the material that you're using. You have these kind of clamp pieces. I'll show you how it works in a second, but there's not really that much to it, even though it looks a little overwhelming to get started. So one of the important things that I'm learning here about dovetails is that you need to make sure that you have your pieces laid out in your box in the correct orientation, meaning that they're overlapped correctly like they're supposed to end up, and that you number all of those corners, all of the joints between each piece, to make sure that you get them in the right order. You also want to make sure that you have all of the upper faces marked all the way around, so that when you put them in the jig, they're all facing the right direction. Another important thing to think about when you're milling up your lumber or preparing whatever stock you're going to use is that you need to have some scrap available to test on. I did quite a few tests with this jig to get it dialed in to make sure that they were tight. You can very easily get the joint to be too loose or too tight or too short or too deep. In fact, right here you can see that I cut it way deeper than it needed to be just in the process of learning the jig. Once I ended up with a good joint that's nice and tight, then I know that it's all set up, and then I can start moving my pieces through it. So just make sure that you have some scrap available that's the exact same thickness as your final pieces. I'm going to be doing half blind dovetails here, and that makes it easier because you only have to use one router bit. Basically, you just put in your two parts that you're going to be cutting, and you can cut them at the same time. If you do a full dovetail, you have to use two bits and cut them separately. Once you get the jig set up, you get the pieces in here and lined up. And then you clamp it down with some extra support pieces on the sides. And then you want to just adjust it until it's nice and tight and all the pieces are fit perfectly together. The pieces are offset by 1/2 inch, the thickness of the material, and that's because when you take the router bit through here, you're cutting out this one and this one, leaving a pin right here, so that when they end up lining up, the pin that's here will go into the slot that's being cut right there. So now's the moment of truth to make sure that I had my settings correct. Some glue will make that really firmed up. I could probably tighten it a little bit by moving the bit. So I may do that on the next one, but it's pretty close and I think it'll be just fine for what we're doing. So luckily each one of these is only a few pins, so it doesn't take very long to do, but I have to do 4 corners on each one of these trays and I have to do 6 trays. So I have a whole lot more of this to do. Let's finish that up and then we'll put them together. All right, I'm just putting some glue in all of these and we're gonna knock them together. Luckily, they're tight enough that you can just kind of knock them together and they'll stay. The glue is definitely gonna firm them up and it will make the wood swell a little bit if there is any gap. It will definitely be tight when it's all said and done. So I'm just gonna glue these up and then we'll worry about putting in the bottom of the tray. So just knocking these together with a little glue, it hasn't dried yet. This thing is already plenty strong, plenty sturdy. I did notice that some of this cherry actually has some cracks in it that I didn't see before. And they're very small cracks, like there's one that runs right through there. And that piece will move a little bit. Luckily it is kind of caught around the dovetail, but I'm gonna reinforce it just to make sure that it doesn't split anymore. As best I can, I'm gonna use some CA glue for that. So I'm just gonna kind of mush it in there. After it dries, I'll sand it down smooth and hope for the best. Now that I've got this glued up, I've got the cracks sealed with some CA glue. Now is the point where I'm probably gonna lose some of you. So far, we've been working at kind of a high woodworking level, fine woodworking, doing dovetails, even though it's using a jig. But next up, we're gonna do something that's purely for strength and simplicity. We're gonna do pocket holes. Now, before you get angry, listen to the use case here. I have 1/2 inch material, and I need to add a bottom to this. And I could add a rabbet all the way around and inset that panel a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of material there. Luckily, with a pocket hole, you can get plenty of strength for the bottom of a drawer, and it's gonna be completely hidden because the pocket holes will be on the bottom, and you're never gonna see them.
Yeah!
For the bottom of these drawers, I got some 1/2 inch cherry plywood. Now I had to special order this and I got it in a project panel. Luckily, it will match and you won't be able to tell that it's plywood instead of solid wood like the outsides. All right, so next up, we're gonna put some spacers underneath this so that the piece will sit down pretty much flush with the top. It's gonna inset just a little bit. So I just ripped down some scraps from the scrap bin, and those are gonna sit in here. And then that will allow us to push it all the way down onto those pieces and then drive in the screws. So just gotta add some glue on all 4 sides, drop it in, and screw it in place. So, of course, it's really ugly like this because you can see the extra glue, you can see the pocket holes, but once you get it flipped over, you've got a pretty nice looking little tray here. And after some sanding, get rid of the glue in the edges, you'll be good to go. This is the last one, so I've got them all put together, but there's still a lot of sanding to do, and then I'm gonna coat them all with several coats of polyurethane. Then we've got to install them, and that is still a thing I haven't figured out. We've got to work around the door hinge that's kind of sticking out. So we're gonna have to figure out a way to push out the outside rail so that these can actually clear the door. So the way I figured out the width of my tray was I took this full width here, I subtracted 1 inch, which is 2 drawer slides that are 1/2 inch each, and then another 3/4 of an inch. That 3/4 of an inch does not clear the hinge, it clears the door. And that works as long as your drawer slide is down in here and not trying to be right behind the hinge. So to make that work, I just need to put some cleats, some pieces of wood that are 3/4 of an inch thick on this wall, and then we can mount the drawer slides following the instructions. Now to make sure that I get those things spaced evenly, I've cut down some pieces and I can use these as guides. So I've got that one down there for the bottom shelf, and then I can set my 3/4 inch piece here, screw it in, then I've got another piece that I can sit on top of that and just work my way up. Now that I've got these pieces in place, I'm gonna find the center of those, and that's gonna be the center of the drawer slide. And you'll also notice that they're not pushed all the way forward like typically you do with drawer slides. You want them at the front of the cabinet. Well, because I spent the time making dovetails on these trays, I don't wanna hide those behind drawer slides. So I'm making it a little bit harder on myself, and I'm putting the slides equal with the back of the tray instead of the front. That's where there's this offset here. You'll also notice that there's a big gap down here at the bottom underneath the bottom tray that we're putting in. And that's because I wanted to both clear the hinge and have a little extra space that we can put a griddle or big things like that underneath these trays. Ew! What? Overall, it's a really simple project, and obviously you don't have to do the dovetails if you don't want to, but for me, this served a few purposes. It taught me how to do something new, and it took advantage of a kind of weird, deep space and turned it into something that is really well organized and we can take advantage of to store a lot of stuff in. Now, the cool thing about this is that you could do the same type of thing in any cabinet in your house. Whether you built the cabinet or not, that doesn't matter. You can build some custom trays to fit inside that space. If this gave you an idea for something that you could do at your house, or gave you the courage to try something you've never tried before, I would love to hear about it down in the comments. We've got tons of other types of projects that you may want to check out, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well so you can catch every new video. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Hey, ow!
The cool thing is here, it has optional? Alright, do you want to get in? Hey, I'm Bob at I Like to Make Stuff, and here I am in my finished kitchen. It's not actually finished because we never put a backsplash up. And for the last year or so, on and off, we've been trying to come up with a good design for the tile to go on this backsplash. And we finally came up with something, but it's a little bit complex. So today, I want to try to figure out some tips and tricks to help you and me put up a complex tile backsplash. Let's give it a shot. So the first thing you gotta do, obviously, is decide on the design. And for my wife and I, that took a lot of back and forth, a lot of research, a lot of Pinteresting, and eventually we ended up with kind of a chevron waterfall thingy, and we ended up sketching it out like this. But this is not good enough to lay out your tile. So the next thing you need to do from here is make it a little bit more exact. One simple way to do that is with graph paper, but an even more flexible way is to go to the computer. Now, before you actually start laying it out, you have to decide what the tile is because the size has a lot to do with the layout. And this can be pretty difficult unless you actually know what's available. So the first thing we had to do was go look at what was available at all the big box stores, rule out all the ones that are crazy expensive, and then look at the sizes that we had to choose from. From that, I wanted to see them up close, so I got some scrap plastic, but you could use MDF or cardboard, and cut out some pieces that are exactly the same size as the tiles listed on websites so you can see them in front of you. From there, we chose the size that we wanted. It was a 2x10, and so then we could go to the computer and start laying it out. I decided to use Illustrator for this, but Fusion would work great. You could even use something like Inkscape, which is free. But basically, I took a photo of our kitchen and brought it in behind the thing that I was gonna be working on, and then I scaled it up so that my 36-inch hood was 36 millimeters on the screen. Just an easy 1-for-1 conversion. With that, I went ahead and drew out some squares that are the size of the tiles and started to lay them out. Now the gaps here are not gonna be 1-for-1, although in Fusion you could make that happen programmatically. It'd be pretty awesome. But I got a general idea of how it was gonna be laid out here, and then I could also count how many individual tiles I was gonna need. With a scaled drawing like this, it's really easy to start getting a good picture of what the whole thing's gonna look like, but it's still not gonna be 1-for-1. For that, you gotta go full scale. I ordered a box of the tile, actually a few boxes of the tile, and it's a good thing we did because a 2x10 tile is not actually 2x10. This thing's almost 1/4 of an inch shorter and about 1/8 of an inch more narrow, and that is gonna cause us a little bit of a problem. But the good thing is we can lay this out full scale on a big piece of paper and use the tiles to lay them out so we can figure out the spacing and make it work with the items that are already mounted on the wall. So what we're gonna do to lay this out full scale is I got a roll of craft paper. This stuff's really inexpensive. You can get it from any kind of art store or craft store. And I'm gonna lay it out on our island. Obviously, if you don't have a surface this big, the floor would work just as well. But I'm using the bottom edge here as the bottom edge of our countertop. So we're gonna work up from this point. It's a known place that we can measure from. We've got our paper laid down, and the next thing, this is really important, is to take very exact measurements of all of the fixed things that your tile's gonna have to interact with. In my case, that's the hood, the stove, the countertops, the window frames, the light switches, and all of that has to be relative to this bottom edge because that's where our paper is. So I'm gonna get those measurements and then draw them on here, and then we can start laying out the tile. I got all those things drawn out on the paper to scale, and one important thing that I marked is the center line for the hood. Because of our design, having that kind of downward V, I want to have that centered line exactly centered within the hood. And so that's kind of where we're gonna start. I don't know, though, exactly where that's gonna go vertically, and so that's one thing we're gonna have to figure out just by laying the tile on this. Another thing we don't know whether we need or not is spacers, because once you start adding spacers in between tiles, that added space is gonna compound over the tiles, and it can make a really big difference over just a few feet. So immediately, as I started laying this out, I started to see that there's actually a different diagonal created in the tile than what I was planning on. So I'm just gonna have to make sure I keep that in mind. And the big thing is I need to move the entire thing down so it actually starts at the countertop and V's up from there. So I'm gonna start over. I've got half of this laid out from the center point so that we can see what it's gonna look like, and we've already decided on a couple of things. One, I don't wanna have this diagonal that's created to continue all the way up into the corner. So we're actually gonna take out these, and the tile's gonna come down from the hood and then cross over. But we also realized that that last tile is now gonna overhang the hood a little bit, or if we take it off, then the last tile is really far in. So we're gonna have to figure that out. The other big thing that we saw is that there's a small gap here created at the top. And of course, you can cut small tiles to fit in those places, but we're gonna see if we can modify things to get rid of that little sliver. The more little slivers that you have and small pieces you have to cut around, the more difficult it can be. It's just tedious work when you're doing an entire big wall. So we're gonna add some spacers to the entire thing, redo it a little bit, and just see how that affects the layout. I added the spacers to one side of this, and it actually fixed a couple of things I'll tell you about in just a second. But another thing I forgot to mention that would be a good thing to do is to test cut some of your tiles. you want to see how they cut, what the cut edges look like. And you can actually try a couple of different types of cutters, maybe a powered one, maybe a non-powered one, to see what kind of an edge they leave. This particular tile has some variation on the outside anyway. So having a cut edge with some variation or some chipping, you can't actually see it very much, but you want to make sure that the cuts are going to look good so that you can integrate them into the design. Now that I know that the cuts are going to work fine, let's talk about the spacers. I chose a 1/16 inch spacers, the smallest one I could find locally, and it actually worked out really well. It moved everything out just enough so that our little slice of a tile is now a square, so that'll be easier to cut and nicer looking. We do have a small little gap here, but I think we can fill that with grout or caulking and it won't be noticeable. And so I'm pretty glad that I tried with the spacers because I think it's actually going to solve this problem. Now, one thing that it didn't actually solve is the overhang from the corner of the hood, whether that piece is in or out, but it did split it down the middle. So it's actually going to be the same amount whether it's under or outside of the hood. So we're just going to go with that and let it stick out a little bit and see how it goes. I know that's a whole lot of talking about laying out tile, but it's absolutely worthwhile. And you may be tempted to skip over that step, but having the actual tile that you're going to use in your space can make a huge difference. And if it doesn't work out, you can always return them. One of the things I learned by actually having the tile here is that when you put it underneath this window, I'm going to have a little gap here. So I can either cut the trim down to add a third tile, or I'm going to have to cut the tile into a smaller sliver to fit under there. I want to know that ahead of time rather than while I'm laying the tile, because as soon as I start mixing the mortar, it's going to start drying. So you have to work pretty quickly once you start laying it. Speaking of laying tile, let's finally get to it. Now, actually setting the tile is pretty easy, and there's a million videos on YouTube about how to set tile. So I'm not going to go through that piece by piece, but a couple more tips. Make sure that you have all of your tile, all of your mortar, your tools, everything out and ready to go before you get started, because once you start putting mortar and grout on the wall, you kind of need to move pretty quickly. Another thing is cutting tile. If you're going to be using a big tile saw that's outside, make sure that it's the right time of year. Somehow I end up doing tile work in the winter, or at least when it's cold outside, like right now. And actually this time I'm going to be using a small tile cutter that's just kind of scoring the tile and then cracks it. And you can use it on any surface. It doesn't make a mess. It's not loud. It's pretty fantastic. As I've been going along, I've been using a little torpedo level to make sure that all the vertical ones are plumb, all the horizontal ones are flat and level, and they were, but then I realized that they're actually beginning to sag a little bit just because there's nothing underneath them to support. So as I added a tile over here to connect it to the countertop, I realized that it was not level anymore. So I'm gonna fix that by taking a straight board and just screwing it to the wall right underneath these to give everything something to sit on. Setting this tile went really smoothly, and I honestly think it's because we spent so much time planning. Whether you're doing a complex design or just something simple, figuring it out on paper first and then laying it out in real scale and full size makes a huge difference and helps save a whole lot of time. Of course, I'm sure there's a ton of tiling tips that we did not talk about, and if you've got those tips, please share them down in the comments so we can all learn together. If you want to see where we started with this kitchen and all the different projects we've done to get here, we're going to send you right over to a playlist, but first, it's time for bloopers. Actually, I don't know how many bloopers we have for this one. I got all the items, I almost said elements. I love elements. It's worthwhile to get the actual tile that you're gonna use. Speaking of laying tile, let's finally get to it. underneath this piece of trim. This was not worth it. So we ran into some hiccups. Ran into a little bit of a problem. The belt on my planer melted. I don't know how to get it to go any further. Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff, and today we're back in my kitchen once again, where I recently put up this backsplash, and today we need to add some floating shelves right here. Of course, there's tons of videos about making floating shelves. In fact, I've made them before, so today I want to do something a little bit different and see if I can make a shelf strong enough to hold me, because if it can hold me, it can hold plates. Let's give it a try. So the plan is we're gonna make 2 shelves, but each one of them is gonna be about 4 feet long, and it's gonna cross 3 studs. So I've got the studs marked. The first thing we have to do is make a bracket that's actually gonna go inside those studs, and then the shelf can go on top of them. This is very similar to other shelves, except for the fact that we're gonna be going into the studs with big pieces of steel. A lot of the times when you buy kits for these things, you'll see that there's a bar that goes against the wall, and then there's some pegs that come out from the wall to add support. Most of those kits will hold between like 50 and 100 pounds, which is probably fine, but I definitely want to go over the top on this one. So we're going to take the same idea, but instead of just coming out the front, part of that bar is actually going to go through this into the wall. And so I've got this flat bar that we're going to use to go along the wall behind the shelf. Then I've got this round bar, the steel, that's going to be going through a hole all the way through to act as a ledge for the shelf to go onto. So we're going to weld these two together. So the first thing we got to do is measure out where the studs are, drill some holes, and then we can weld these pieces in. So the plan is to take these rods that I cut and put them through this flat bar, but I need to drill a hole for that, and it's a 5/8 inch hole. That's a big hole to drill in metal. So what you do for this is you start with a smaller hole, and you make sure you get it right in the center, and so you use a smaller drill bit. And once you've got that pilot hole, then you use the step bit, and that can easily make that hole the right size. I've got those holes, but the thing that really matters here is that when they are welded on, they are perfectly square, because they can move in all of these directions, and if all 3 of them are facing different ways, it's going to be really hard to get the wood on. So I need to make sure that these 2 pieces are square to each other in this dimension and in this dimension. And the way I'm going to try to do that is to put in all of these rods, and I'm going to lay it on the table so that we're actually not having to fight the weight of the rods. We're going to fight the weight of the bar, which is a lot less. And so we're going to use some magnets to square them up and hold them in that position so that I can tack around there, get them into place. Now that we've got the bracket just about done, this is the shelf. Now this is a 2-inch thick, 4-foot long piece of cherry. It's actually 2 pieces of cherry. This was rough sawn. I milled it down, joined them together, so I have this one big block of wood. Obviously, you don't have to use cherry for something like this, but it is a solid wood, which is going to be really important when it comes to the strength of this thing. So the next thing I got to do here is finish milling it up, but I actually can't drill the holes in this until I know exactly where they need to go, which means we have to put the bracket in the wall first. And by the way, if you want to see more about milling lumber, we have a whole bits video that's just about that. We'll put a link to it. Hey everybody, I wanted to take a quick minute to tell you about a new product that we are making 100% in-house, and it's our new push stick. Now over the years, I've made a lot of push sticks out of scrap material, and that works just fine, but I always kind of feel bad throwing them away. So we've tried to make what we're calling the sustainable push stick, because this entire black section, the core of this thing, is made out of 100% recycled plastic, and the bottom section is replaceable. So once you use this for a while and you start to tear it up, you can actually take it apart, replace the bottom section with the other one that comes in the package, and then you're good to go. You can recycle the old one and keep moving on. We're also making all of the packaging in-house. All of this stuff is made, assembled, shipped from our offices. And if you want to support us and get a good solid push stick to use at your table saw, be sure to go to shop.iltms.com and find out more. I know where the studs are. I marked them a little bit further up, but I need to know exactly where they are right here. I need to know where the center of each of these 3 studs is because I have to drill a hole that's perfectly centered and perfectly in line with the frame that I just made. So I'm gonna use a level to get those lines transferred down, and then I have to measure up from this edge, the thickness, half the thickness of the shelf. I have to do some figuring, but basically it really matters where I put these holes. Now that I've got these marked, I need to drill a 5/8 hole to match the piece of steel. And the squareness, straightness, flatness of this hole really matters. I've got this long bit that I'm going to use to drill the matching hole in the piece of wood, but if I were to use this on the wall, it's a big arm that would make it very easy to get this thing off-centered and make it go up or down. So instead, I'm going to use a shorter bit and just try to keep this thing level. So that's basically where it's gonna go, except obviously it needs to go on these rather than just sitting on top of them. So here I can now mark exactly where the outside of these rods are on the bottom of the shelf. I can take it downstairs and then drill holes all the way through here so that this rod has a place to go. I did run into a little bit of a problem. When I was drilling the holes in the wall, I didn't have them as level as I thought I did. The squareness, straightness, flatness of this hole really matters. So the rods are coming at a little bit different angles. Luckily, I think when I go to hammer this piece of wood on, it's gonna push everything into place. I don't think it's gonna be a big deal, but putting a level on the drill when I was drilling the hole would have been a good idea. Now I've got the bracket on the wall and the shelf is actually ready to go up there and start fitting, but I want to fix a couple of things on this piece of wood before we take it up there and get too far along. I've got several little checks and cracks in this piece of cherry that I want to fill so that they won't get any bigger. You can do that with CA glue or you can use epoxy. I use the 4-minute epoxy from Total Boat. This will make it happen really quickly, and we can mix in some black pigment so it'll look really cool too. It's also possible, now that I think about it, that this hole is not deep enough. Nope, that's not it. You just won't go that last little bit. Come on. I feel like it's just stopped. This was not worth it, because I don't need to sit on this shelf. I just kind of wanted to see if I could, but good grief, if you're putting this much weight on a shelf, you should be using a different kind of shelf, probably. Plus, I made it harder than it needed to be in the first place, so that's on me.
I believe a shelf that a person gets on is called a bunk.
It's true. The big problem with the shelves that I had is that the belt on my planer melted and actually broke while I was milling that shelf. And even though the pieces looked flat, they actually weren't. That's since been fixed. I've replaced the belt so we can mill that shelf and future shelves to be completely flat. But the other big problem was drilling the holes. So if this is the wall and you're looking at the cross section of the wall, this is your shelf sticking out here, and then this is the stud behind. What we're doing is drilling a hole this direction and then one this direction, and if those aren't completely coplanar, if those aren't perfectly in line, then we end up with this or this, just stuff that doesn't work. And especially since we're relying on a solid piece of steel to drive between these, it doesn't have any flex on purpose. So unless we get that hole front to back completely in line, the steel is actually causing a problem. The other thing is that we actually had 3 pieces of steel crossing something, and that's unnecessary. We don't really need that kind of strength. I just kind of wanted to see if we could do it. But if we take this centerpiece out, then we don't have a pivot point. We don't have 3 things to try to line up. We just have 2, and that's gonna be a lot easier. So I'm gonna go back, fill in all of the holes that I drilled in the studs with some dowels and glue that fit perfectly. Like so perfectly that I have to hammer them in to fill those gaps in, and then we're gonna re-drill the holes in both the wall and the shelf, and we've got a solid way to do it. Okay, to do this the right way, we're gonna use a tool that I had and I completely forgot about, but it's actually perfect for this and it's very easy to use. Definitely something worth having around. It's a drill guide. This one is from Rockler. We used it on a project a long time ago and I actually haven't touched it since because I haven't really needed it, but it's perfect for this. It's kind of like having a drill press that you can put a hand drill in, like an electric drill. You mount right on the back of this, you put in the bit, and then this whole mechanism slides on these parallel rails. You can also change the angle by making the entire thing lean any direction that you want. But if you want to get a perfectly perpendicular hole to the surface that you're on, you just put this base on that surface and then drill it. Perfect for this. Let's do it. The drill guide is absolutely the way to go. This fit together better, it went in easier, it's still plenty strong enough to hold my weight, which is totally more than it needs to hold. So with that information, I'm gonna go ahead and make the second one, then these can be finished. Okay. I don't know why you would actually need a shelf strong enough to sit on to hold your weight, but maybe there actually is a reason. Do you have an idea as to why you would need a shelf this strong? If so, let me know down in the comments, because maybe this is a solution for a problem that I don't know about. Either way, getting to this solution was pretty awesome. I'm glad I finally figured out that using the drill guide is the way to do it, and only having to use 2 steel rods instead of 3 is good because you don't have to drill into as many studs. But this is just one of the many videos we have of this entire kitchen renovation. We're gonna send you right over to a playlist, but first, it's time for bloopers. Thanks for watching.
Imagine slipping at your tile. Action!
Oh.
Okay. Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff, and a couple of years ago I completely ripped out this kitchen. We completely ripped it out and we rebuilt brand new cabinets, put in a giant island, moved walls, added lots of lights, and it's been almost done except for that. Or actually, the fact that there's nothing there is the problem. We don't have a light over our kitchen table. We've bought some and returned them because they were too big or too small or too bright or they didn't look good in front of the windows. I'm done with it. So today, we're just gonna make one. So here's the actual problem for this space. This is our kitchen table. This is where my family eats all of our meals together. We play cards. We do a lot of stuff at this table, and we want this space. We want to enjoy it, but it's actually kind of hard to do without a light over top of it. We've got a really ugly old lamp that's been kind of working, but now that the sun goes down earlier, it gets dark in here at like 5:30, so we need to fix this. Like I said before, we've bought a few lights and tried them in this space and held them up, but they just weren't right. Now the good thing about that is it actually helped me build a list of the things that we need in a light fixture, so I can use that list to design one that will work in this space. So what are the actual needs of the table? Well, one, it's really long and kind of skinny. It's 3 feet by 7 feet, so it's definitely a rectangle, not a square, which means that the light fixture kind of needs to follow the length of the table to spread light across the entire thing. The other thing is that it's in a corner with these 2 wonderful big windows that I love, but the problem with the windows windows is that it's visually a lot of background noise. So if the light fixture doesn't have enough body to be visible, it gets completely lost by all the stuff that's in the background. Here's what I actually want to try to work into this light. It needs to be kind of the format of the table, a little bit long, not too tall. It's gonna be hanging in front of the window, so I wanted to have a little body to it so you can actually see it, but also let a little bit of light out through the sides. But mainly I want the light to go down onto the table and up onto the ceiling so it'll reflect off the white and fill the space. Past that, probably we'll make it out of wood because we don't have a whole lot of wood grain in here. There's a lot of white cabinets and everything, so we need some kind of light wood up there. I also want to make it out of something that I actually have access to and won't be too heavy because it's going to be so big. But I think I have a plan, so let's head to Fusion and I'll show you what I'm thinking about. I started out with a paper sketch. I've got these little ribs and I'm not exactly sure on the shape yet, but I think if you stack those ribs up around some sort of a structure, you can make a shade. I've seen desk lamps like this before that are all laser cut, so I think doing a similar thing on a really big scale that hangs around light bulbs from the ceiling will probably make for a pretty cool lamp. I tried a bunch of different shapes, but I ended up on this one, and this is gonna act as the outside profile of the light, and I'll cut pieces that are this size and then wrap them around a structure. But that structure is over 3 feet long, and that little rib is 1/2-inch plywood, maybe 1/4-inch plywood, which either way means we're gonna need a lot of them. So there's a ring at the top and the bottom, so each one of the ribs can mount on both of those to hold the structure, but there's 140 ribs. But there's one more thing that I didn't actually tell you I want this to do. I want it to look interesting from different angles. So rather than having all these ribs perpendicular to the rings that are holding them so that they all look like this, I've taken every rib and twisted it and tilted it. So everything is leaning on 2 axes. That way when you walk around the room, these 2 shapes are gonna constantly be moving like this. And so the light that comes through them is gonna look a little bit different. There's actually 2 parts to this project, and the second one is the big shade. We're gonna get to that later on because I'm not exactly sure if it's gonna work. But the first thing is the actual light. Now the actual light fixture on the inside of this thing is kind of a rough idea in my head. It's not very specific. I know that I have a pipe that's gonna come down from the box in the ceiling. It's gonna attach to some sort of a bar that goes across and then has 3 globe lights hanging from the bottom of it. Well, rather than try to make those globe lights, I'm just gonna buy 3 lights that already have everything in them and I can attach them to some sort of a bar. But I really didn't know what that bar was gonna be. Well, luckily, I'm a little bit of a material hoarder, and so I found this. I have no idea where I got this. I have no idea what it's from. It's still got a sticker on it from something, but I think it's gonna be perfect. And the reason I think it's gonna be perfect is because I need something that can connect to a tube coming from the ceiling. I need something that can house a bunch of wiring that splits into 3 lights and then hold 3 lights that are attached to the bottom of it. Well, this thing is basically like a channel. It's square tubing with no top. So if I weld on a little top section here, that can connect up. If I drill holes in the bottom of it, that can connect down, and it's a perfect channel where I can run all the wiring through. Plus, I can easily cover up the top of this to keep dust out of it, and it's thin enough metal that I can cut it, but thick enough metal that it's strong. So the plan is basically just to cut this down to length, but leave a little extra section so I can box it in again, drill some holes, and I should be good to go. Okay, now it looks exactly like it did before, except it's this much shorter, and this piece can actually be cut down to become the cap that goes on top. That way, when I mount my pole to the ceiling, it can come down and go into a hole that I'll drill right here, and then I'll have the beginnings of a light fixture. Here it is. I gotta paint it black, and I also have to put a hole for the down tube, and then 3 holes in the bottom to mount the lights, but unfortunately, all of those parts are not here yet, so we're gonna move on to the shade. Now, before I go cutting 140 some odd pieces of wood on the laser, I need to prove that this thing's gonna work. So instead of doing the big oval, we're actually just gonna cut kind of the corner of it, one little section, cut a few pieces on the laser just to make sure that everything fits together, and the Fusion model does exactly what I think it will. Well, it's a good thing I did those tests because my idea did not really work out like I wanted it to. I mean, it kind of worked, but it just didn't look as good as it should. I definitely have a lot I need to fix. I spent a lot of time cutting a bunch of pieces just trying to get the fit right, so all the pieces would actually stay together without glue, even though they will be glued. And once I finally got a working kind of prototype of the corner, I realized that all the pieces are too thin, they're too far apart, and you can just like see way too much. I ended up spending the entire afternoon modifying the model, making it better. Each one of the ribs is now a little bit thicker, they're closer together, and I changed how they grab the top and the bottom rings. So now, without glue, they actually hold together pretty well. So this was kind of a waste. I mean, from one perspective, none of these pieces are usable. They're not even the right shape anymore because I've modified the model, but I did just cut sections. So instead of wasting all of the material, I just wasted a little bit of material, and I went from pieces that were too loose and wouldn't hold each other together to finally pieces that are nice and tight and will stick together without glue. So my new Fusion model is ready to be cut on the laser, but all of the lamp stuff just showed up. So we're gonna make the fixture first. Now the cool thing about most light fixtures is that there are kind of some standards across the board, which means you can buy spare parts and use different light fixtures to put them together and make your own. I bought 3 of these globe lights. They come with everything you need to mount the light, but the cool thing is that they can kind of come apart and you can use them as you need to. This one has a little collar at the top of it that you can take off, and then I can tighten it back down, so it'll allow me to mount this in the bottom of my metal channel that I made. This light also comes with the cover that goes on the ceiling and the bracket to hang it, so that's good. The only other thing I needed was a way to actually hang the light, something to connect it to the ceiling. Luckily, you can buy extension tubes. These have a female thread on one end, male on the other, so you can just connect them and make this thing as long as you need it to be. And I got 4 10-inch sections for like $5. The only thing I need to do to mount all these different things in this box channel thing is drill some holes. So, I got all the holes in the bottom, I got the hole in the top, now I just need to paint it black, and then I can actually start putting it together. So there you go, I made a light out of other lights. And it's pretty much done. I gotta put the bulbs in before I can put the globes on, and then I have to tighten up the things on the back, but I also have to deal with this mess. Now, oddly enough, earlier today, I had one of those comments that was like, I was with you until you got out the 3D printer, I'm out. But honestly, a 3D printer is a really fantastic solution for something like this. In just a few minutes, I can take some really basic measurements, I can make a quick model, and print in just a couple of hours some really simple covers that will snap into place, covering this entire section. It'll keep dust out of here. If I ever need to get in there for any reason, I can snap them right off. And honestly, you're never gonna see them because they're on the inside of the light fixture. So, 3D printer for the win. Now, before I can do anything with the light that I've made, I've gotta have a place to hang it. Luckily, when I renovated the kitchen, I added electrical up there in the attic space, but there's no box. Adding a box to the ceiling is actually pretty easy if you've got access from above. I do have plenty of access from the attic, but I wanted to point out how I'm doing this because this light fixture is actually gonna be pretty heavy. Luckily, right where I wanted to put this, there's a joist running right across the space. So I've got something that I can attach the box to, and the box that I got is actually made for ceiling fans. It's got a metal bracket built into it, and it comes with screws, so you can put it right to the side of a joist, and it'll be a nice strong connection to hold the weight of the light that I put under it. Cutting the hole in the ceiling can be done a couple of different ways. A lot of people use hole saws and just drill up from the bottom to make the hole for the box, and that works perfectly fine. In fact, my friend April Wilkerson cut a basketball in half and put that around the bit, so when she drilled the hole into the ceiling, all of the sawdust fell into the basketball. Super smart. I'm gonna be using a drywall knife from above, from the attic space. So for me, I'm gonna hang a trash bag where the hole goes, so all of that dust just goes into the bag. Okay, well, it's not light. I mean, it is because it's a lamp. Let's go try it out. I don't know what I was really worried about because that turned out exactly like I wanted it to, and I'm super happy with how it looks. The plan was to have it change shape and view as you walk around it, and that absolutely worked out as well, although I am a little bit curious to see what it would look like, so I'm gonna keep it if the slats weren't angled. But I'm not curious enough to do it again. I'm gonna leave it just like it is because I like it, my family likes it, and we have a light. I hope this gave you an idea for something that you could do in your house, and if it did, let me know down in the comments because I would love to hear it. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Now it's time for bloopers. So the only thing I need to do to mount all of these different things in this tube is drill some holes. Tube, channel, holder, rod, stick. The way I'm gonna do this is that, not the way I'm gonna do this. Sure, luckily, you can I'm gonna start over.